other piece I'm making, I'm using an 8-inch square piece of mount board as my base. You could use a canvas board, or if you've got some like stiff corrugated cardboard, some packaging board, that would be great. I just want something sturdy just to use as my base. And I'm going to go around the edge with a bit of gilding wax, just because most of it's going to be covered over with some of this patterned cardstock. But I am distressing the edge of this, and we'll see a little bit of the base behind it. And for this I'm using Radiant Red Metallic Luster, and just using my finger to apply this around the edge to add a bit of colour and shine. Doesn't have to be too neat because, say, the majority of this is going to be covered over. Just want to be able to see the colour under the edge of the pattern cardstock. Just like to give these a little bit of a buff with some paper towel. Just takes away some of the excess so it doesn't smudge everywhere, and it helps buff it up into a shine. I cut this piece of cardstock just very slightly smaller than 8 inches square, and this is a paper distressing tool. I'm just going to go around the edge, and this just adds a bit of texture, roughs it up. If you don't have one of these, you can use the blade of a pair of scissors. Just be careful, mind your hands as you do it. Obviously the blade in this is hidden, so it makes it a lot easier. Just to further add a bit more definition to this, I'm going to go around the edge with some ink. I'm just using Walnut Stain Distress Oxide and a foam tool, and that just helps pick up that texture around the edge of the paper. So now I can glue this in place. You can use some double-sided tape if you want to. I'm just using some Cosmic Shimmer acrylic glue. Just pop that into a bottle with a fine tip. It makes for easy application. It's a good strong glue and it grabs quickly. So that's our base all ready and prepared. And I want to add more dimension to this. So we've got, this is a piece of 6-inch grey board, and I want this to be raised up. You could use silicone glue or some foam pads underneath. And I'm going to decorate on top of this, and then put, as I say, put this on with some dimensional glue or something underneath it to hold it up. So in a similar way to how we did the beginning, I'm going to put some gilding wax around the edge with my fingers, and then we'll be popping some music paper, some vintage music paper as the layer on top of this. This is some vintage music paper out of the ephemera pack, and I'm just going to tear this. It's quite fragile with it being an older paper, and it's quite lightweight, so I'm just going to tear this to fit onto my piece of grey board that I've got. Doesn't have to be too perfect. So quite happy with that. We can see some of the red around the edge, and we've got a nice uneven finish. Again, I'm just going to ink with some of the Distresser Oxides, just lightly and carefully, just around the edge. And taking my glue, I'm going to glue that in place. On top of this, I want to use this decorative chipboard frame, and I'm going to cover this with some gilding wax before I apply it. Again, just going to use my finger to do that. This time I'm going to use the Iced Espresso metallic luster, which is a dark brown. And then I might highlight it with a paler colour afterwards. But just building the colour up gradually with a gentle touch. These are quite fragile. I'm just going to finish off with a little champagne ice, which is a much paler colour. Just add a few highlights. So now we can attach this onto our music paper, and again just using my glue. This is where the fine nozzle turns out to be really useful. Just lining it up as best I can centrally on there. And pressing down. This is one of the little vintage images that you can buy in the shop, and I'm just going to tuck this in underneath that frame. Just like that. And I think I'm going to use one of these sentiments. I'm going to use So Sweet sentiment, another one of the little chipboards. And instead of putting gilding wax on this, I'm just going to colour it using an alcohol marker. And I'm going to glue that in place on there. I'm going to pop some of these little metal corners around the edge of my piece of grey board. Then I'm going to put the grey board onto the baseboard that we did earlier and start adding some of the larger embellishments and the MDF words as well. These will just pop on here and I can close them on with a pair of pliers. So I've stacked up a couple of layers of foam tape on the back of this just to give it some extra height, and just lining it up centrally on our backboard, popping that in place. So now it's time to add some of our other embellishments. So we've got some of the larger flowers, some fabric flowers and some paper flowers. I'm going to be applying these with some glue gel, just simply because it's the easiest way. You could use a hot glue gun. You want something where you can get a blob of glue and press the embellishment into it. So any that have got a long stem, if I don't want the stem, I just snip some of it off and then just tend to coil the rest underneath, and then we'll be able to press this into place. I do want to add some MDF in here, and I'm going to do that before I go any further. And I'm just going to colour this with some of the red gilding wax again, and probably the same with the little cogs as well. I'll be right back as soon as I've done that. So these are nicely coloured with the red gilding wax. I'm just going to glue them in place with the acrylic glue again. So just popping that there. And then I'm going to overlay some of these cogs over the chipboard ones. Just adds a little extra dimension and some more interest. I've got one of the glass cabochons, the clock cabochons. And I'm going to pop that inside this large cog because it fits there quite nicely. I'm going to take one of these metal birdcage charms and have it as though it's hanging off this little chipboard chain. So now I can decide where I can put some other flowers. So I still want to use a couple more of these. And I was wondering whether to pop this little cherub on. I do quite like him. Just going to give him a quick coat of gesso, and then I can add some gilding wax. Gilding wax I find sticks a little bit better to a painted surface than this resin surface, so I'll be right back as soon as I've done that. So here I've given this a coat of black gesso and then just brushed over with the champagne ice coloured metallic lustre just to pick out the detail. And I'm just going to attach this. Find the glue gel a little bit better for this because the surface can sometimes be a little bit uneven. We're going to have him just resting there on the top of that frame. And there, that is my finished vintage Valentine panel.